And so, man, are you guys ready for Christmas? How many of you went Black Friday shopping? One Black Friday shopper. Okay, there you go. Maybe two. There was Abe. Abe was a Black Friday shopper. The rest of you were smart enough to stay home, right? Picking on the two people who shopped. No, hey, well, we are glad that you're here. We are getting into, it's that time of the year. It's Christmas season, and I feel like we can officially say that. You can't say it before Thanksgiving is over. That's a firm rule for me. It's like Halloween, there's Christmas trees going up, and it's like, no, what are you doing? So I boycott those stores. I refuse to shop at them. But no, now it's safe to say it's Christmas time. And we're going to start a new Christmas series called Socks and Underwear. I got the idea from a church in Kentucky called Southeast Christian Church. But this series is all about the gifts we get at Christmas. And a lot of you probably remember opening up gifts as a kid. You remember opening up your toys, your electronics, your games. For some of you, maybe like Andrew, you got like a good stick and a rock, maybe a can, back in the day, But then there were the gifts that you really liked that we might call the super gifts. You know what I mean? These are the gifts you really wanted. These were the Red Ryder BB guns, How many of you had that gift that you went to your parents and you begged your parents for that gift? Like if you could get nothing else, that you wanted that gift. How many of you had a gift like that? Okay, just real quick, if you know what that gift was, just tell your neighbor real quick about what kind of gift you wanted. What was that one special gift that you really wanted for Christmas? Go ahead, do that now. You people were greedy. You guys are still talking. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? I remember some of the gifts that I really wanted. You could see them up here. One year, we wanted to get a video game system, and so my parents got us our very first system as a family. We got a Sega Genesis. Played Sonic the Hedgehog. This was the real deal. Oh, go back a slide. Played Sonic the Hedgehog. It was the best. It was a family gift, but it quickly just became my gift because my sisters didn't really know how to use it. That was the problem. They didn't understand and appreciate what a video game could be, and so it quickly became my present. Another year, it was all about Legos. I really love like the pirate Legos and even the castle Legos. And let me just tell you, parents, in case you don't know, there's a huge difference between Legos and Mega Bloks. If you love your kids, Legos, okay? If you want to send them a message, Mega Bloks, okay? That's how that works. I'm just helping you out. I also, you maybe can't tell so much in the picture, that's a big puffy pullover starter jacket. Do you remember when those were a big deal? I had to have one of those things, or I was going to die. I was going to school in like a lame normal jacket, and all the other kids, no one would talk to me until I had my starter pullover jacket. And but now all I really want is money. You know what I'm on? Like my parents say, hey, what do you want for Christmas? I'm like, I'd like to pay the electric bill. That sounds nice. I had to buy 4 new tires at Costco the other day. And I was like, Merry Christmas to me. It's like, hey, it's Christmas. But in my house, so growing up, we didn't always get what we wanted. My parents were pretty tight on the budget. They wouldn't just spend a lot of money. A lot of years it was like, hey, there's $50. Decide what you can get with $50, and that's your Christmas. And they wouldn't spend anything beyond that. Like if it was $50 in tax, they'd be like, you better find a sale for us. Like they were tight on that budget. And my mom, she was always trying to find ways to buy me what I wanted, but she would get like the knockoff versions. So like I would tell her, yeah, I want some Sega games. And so like one year, she was always hoping I wouldn't know the difference, She's like, what? It's a Sega game, or, oh, it's this, or it's that. And so one year she got me a game called The Exodus. This is about Moses from the Bible. This was special. This was special. Here, show the next picture. Those are the graphics. let's just say that the book was better. Is that fair to say? The book was much better than the game. But as a kid, the worst gifts that you could get were clothes. They were clothes. And I always knew which boxes were the clothes. I hope you can tell. Like, can you see the way that's wrapped? You always knew what the clothes were. They were either these, like, really slim packages that were really flimsy, or they would be like the Kohl's boxes, the big rectangles, and you just pick it up and you're like, oh, clothes, And if the box didn't give it away, my mom did, because whenever I'd pick up one of those boxes, she would try to make me excited about it. She'd be like, oh, good, you really need some of these, which was code for, I know you're going to hate this. But and you'd open it up, and sure enough, it'd be clothes. It'd be socks, underwear, pajamas. And that's not why I woke up on Christmas. I didn't wake up on Christmas to get clothes. And so I'd pretty much pick out the boxes that were clothes, and I'd ignore them to the end. I just kind of set them to the side and work on the presents that I wanted, and then go through the motions of opening up those presents. I could just look at those packages and know that's not something I wanted. And actually, I think the first Christmas was a lot like that. When Jesus came, he was this gift the world needed. But when he came, he was largely ignored. In John 3:16, it says, God so loved the world that he gave his son. But when Jesus came, no one really seemed to care. No one was really waiting by the tree that morning to see what God had given them in Jesus. During our Socks and Underwear series, we're going to be going through the story of the birth of Jesus, but this year we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to be looking at the gospel story of Jesus through John 1. Now, that's not normally where you tell the Christmas story from. Normally, when we tell the Christmas story, we use gospels like Matthew or Luke, but this year we're going to use John's gospel. And let me show you really quickly the way that John tells the Christmas story. In John chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's interesting the way John does this, because when you look at the other Gospels, they all do it a little bit differently. Like in Matthew, the way Matthew begins his Gospel is by showing us the genealogy of Jesus, because what Matthew's trying to do is he's trying to write to Jewish people to tell them about how Jesus was the answer to Old Testament prophecy. When you read Mark starts off when Jesus is 30 years old. He actually starts off at the baptism of Jesus, and he probably does that because that's probably when Mark first met Jesus. Luke, he starts his gospel off with Jesus' cousin, which is kind of a weird thing to do, but he starts it off with John the Baptist, and John the Baptist was the forerunner of Jesus. He was the one who paved the way so Jesus could begin his ministry. But that's not what John does here. John goes to before the world began. He says, in the beginning, those words harken back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he's saying that in that same beginning, back when God created the heavens and the earth, there was this word. Now, word here is being used for Jesus, okay? And the word, it comes from a Greek word, logos, which means an expression of a thought or a manifestation. And so this is being used to describe who Jesus was before we know him as Jesus. And he says that Jesus was there. He was there when the world was made. And he says that he was there with God. And he doesn't just say Jesus was with God. He says that the Word was God, that Jesus was God, that the Logos was Theos. And God, from the beginning of the world, was thinking about and planning to send us this gift in Jesus. And we see this in the Bible as early as Genesis 3:15. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve have sinned, they've fallen, they've eaten from the tree they weren't supposed to, and they're having the argument about whose fault it was, the man, the woman, or the snake, and they're all doing that. But in the midst of that argument, and in the midst of all that sin, God gives us a prophecy here about Jesus coming into the world. He says that I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. And so since Adam and Eve sinned, God's plan was to send Jesus. He had been thinking about this gift since then. And so for thousands of years, God planned to send his son. And you would think that's going to be a pretty big event, right? Right? I mean, he's saying that God is going to come into the world. Like, what bigger thing could happen in the history of the world? What more could you want? This was going to be the greatest gift that anyone could see. This was going to be the most thoughtful gift that anyone could give. And so, for thousands of years, there was this expectation, especially amongst the Jewish people, that God was going to send his son. And they knew these prophecies, and they were waiting for Jesus to come into the world. And so they read the prophecies. Some of them even knew when Jesus was going to come, but the night Jesus came, again, it was largely unnoticed. The God of the universe came, and it was pretty uneventful. Only a handful of shepherds show up the night Jesus was born. And I got to thinking, with all the thought that God put into sending Jesus into the world, doesn't it seem like there should be more there? Like, why didn't more of the world pay attention to when Jesus was born? I have an idea, and I in no way want to be critical of God, but I think God is bad at wrapping his presents. Now, when I say that, I'm not someone who can stand in judgment. I actually feel kind of good about that because I'm terrible at wrapping presents. I remember one year I was giving Tamara this nice necklace, and I bought the necklace. I had put the thought into the gift, and it got to Christmas Day, and I was like, what am I going to give her this in? And so I found a blue backpack in my car, and I just stuck it in the blue backpack and said, Merry Christmas. And she just looked at me and I think we were engaged at that point, so it was like 5 days before the wedding, and I think she had thoughts about changing her mind. Like, she was like, really? What is this? What are you doing here? And so, but thankfully, she liked the necklace, so that made it better. But wrapping isn't my thing, but I think God wraps his presents like I do. I mean, think about this for a second. He puts this gift to the world in the hands of Mary and Joseph. Like, he could have given this gift to kings, to people who were rich, who could have provided Jesus everything he could have ever wanted, who could have made him known, made him famous. But instead, God gave Jesus to two people who weren't even married yet. He gives Jesus to two people who are so poor that when they go to the temple to dedicate Jesus, instead of being able to offer a lamb as the law required, they were so poor that they had to give the minimum offering of 2 doves. They couldn't even afford a lamb for the lamb. God gives Jesus to Joseph, who then has to go to Joseph's hometown of Bethlehem, and they're not even welcome there with his family. They have to go look for an inn, and since nothing's available, they had to give birth to Jesus in a shed. And that's something we need to talk about because we glorify this part of the story, Like, we have the pretty nativities. They're beautiful. We have a Precious Moments one that sits by our tree, and they all have the big eyes, and they're all there like this. It's wonderful. We always tell this picturesque story of what the nativity was like. It's almost like they got to Bethlehem. They're like, we could go to a hospital, but let's try a home birth. Or you know what? I was on Pinterest, and I saw there's this new thing, barn birthing. Let's try that. That would be great. And so there's Mary and Joseph, and they're sitting in a barn, and they're tenderly looking at Jesus, and all the animals are bowing before Jesus, like in The Lion King to Simba, and it was. And if this was today, Mary afterward would take a selfie with Jesus, and she'd have a duck face on and say #blessed. She would do all that stuff. No, they were put outside with animals in a shed. and there's not PETA, there's not an FDA to see how the food's being taken care of. They're with animals who aren't clean. They're there in the manure and in the dirt and in the slop. And then they swaddled Jesus in clothes and they put him in a manger. Think about this. In the beginning was the Word, and they wrapped him in rags and put him in a horse trough. And the only people who come to visit that night are shepherds, the lowest, dirtiest, uneducated people there were. For all of the thousands of years of thought that God put into giving us Jesus, it doesn't seem like he cared about wrapping the present. You think that God would be a little more intentional than that. But if we think about it, I think maybe God meant to do it that way. That for the thousands of years that he spent planning, he had planned to send Jesus exactly the way that he did. That he meant to give Jesus to those people in that place, in that time. And let me tell you why. For one, it was so Jesus could experience what we do. It was so that Jesus could experience what we do. God wanted to identify with our struggles. Look at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. Just verse 15. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, and yet without sin." Have you ever just tried to talk to friends who just couldn't get what you were going through? Like you got something going on and you're really having a hard time, and they come along and they try to be, in their minds, comforting. And so they start doing these things and saying these things. Oh, you just got to do this, or oh, you just got to do that, or oh, if you would just try this. And you're just sitting there and you're like, thank you. Thank you for all of that. That was so helpful. And basically what you just learned from these people is, I'm not going to talk to them. Because they're trying to fix it and they're breaking it. You know what I'm saying? And so they just don't get it. It's hard to identify with something that we haven't exactly experienced. Like for instance, people can struggle with how much to tip, But how many of you have been servers? How many of you have been waiters? I worked in a restaurant. I honestly think that working in a restaurant makes you bend a little bit more to the generous side, because if you've ever had to live off tips, you know what that's like. You know that struggle. It's like, man, this is rough. I put in all this work. The guy in the kitchen messed up the order, and now I have to pay for it because I'm not going to have enough in my check this week. When you've been through that, I just think it makes you a little bit more understanding when you tip. I think this is a struggle in our country too. I think a lot of the arguments we see happening come from people who don't know what it's like to be on the other side of something, I have a friend who's a church planter in Texas named Steve. He's biracial. He's half Jamaican and he's half white. And we were standing there talking at a conference, and a guy came up to him. I'm standing there, Steve's here, and this guy just comes up while we're in the middle of a conversation, and he says to Steve, "You don't think racism's still a thing, do you?" And I just look at this guy like, are you the dumbest human being on the planet? Like, what is wrong with you? And my friend Steve was good about it. Here's what he said. He said, I'm the only black guy here in the midst of a bunch of white people. He said, how do you think I feel? He said, you don't feel it because you're like a fish in water. A fish in water doesn't know that it's wet. You're a fish. This is water. I'm not a fish. Unless you know what it's like to be on the other side of something, you have no idea what that's like. And here is this God who's in heaven, who from our perspective doesn't have a clue of what it's like to be us. Why would he? He's been in heaven. He could speak things into creation. He's never needed anything. He's never had to ask for anything. He has always had what he has needed, and he could do whatever he wants. Why would he understand me? And he comes to earth. And when he comes to earth, he doesn't come to the top. He goes to the bottom. He goes to the bottom. And he lives like the lowest of us to show us that he knows what it's like to be poor and unwelcome. I don't know where you're at, but I'm sure a number of you are looking at Christmas this season and wondering, how am I going to get gifts for my kids? Where's the money going to come from? Or maybe you're looking at this Christmas and you see all these people, they got somewhere to go, but you've got nowhere to go. You don't got family, you don't got friends, you're alone this holiday. Jesus knows what that's like. He knows what that's like. If you've been neglected, if you've been alone, if you've been abused, Jesus knows what that's like. He was betrayed by one of his closest friends. And then the other 11 run. He knows what that's like. You think he got family problems during his ministry? His family literally tried to commit him. They come to take Jesus away at one point because they think he's crazy. Jesus knows exactly what it's like to be you. He knows exactly what it's like to struggle. And he does it for our benefit, so that, as Hebrews 4:16 says, he goes through this, he knows what it's like to be us, so that therefore we could draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. We can go to Jesus in those moments and say, I know I can go to God. I know I can talk to God because he knows exactly what it's like to be me. He knows exactly what it's like for me to struggle. He knows exactly what it's like for me to be tempted. He knows exactly what it's like to be alone. God isn't this out-of-touch person who doesn't know how to talk to you. He has been where you are, and you can confidently go before God because he knows what it's like and he can help you when you need it. Jesus came to identify with us in our struggles so we know we have someone to go to. But I also think Jesus came wrapped the way he did, so to speak, to set an example of humility. Like, we expect the coming of Jesus to be some sort of royal coronation, you know? Like, there's going to be all this fanfare. Like, there's a Beyonce angelic, performance that's going to happen. A Led Zeppelin band of angels that are going to come, and they're going to sing, they're going to celebrate, they're going to have all this fanfare, and all the VIPs are going to come. We'd expect Jesus even to be born in some amazing, miraculous way. And don't get me wrong, the angels did sing for Jesus' birth. That's not really all that surprising. I mean, the Son of God was born. You'd expect angels to sing for that. But what's surprising isn't that the angels came and sang. What's surprising is who the angels sang to. Because they don't go and sing in front of the rich and the VIPs and the kings. They go out into a field where there's only some shepherds and they sing to them. They go to the lowest of society and sing to them. And yes, Jesus was born in an amazing way. He was born of a virgin. But again, you would expect a miracle to accompany the birth of Jesus. It's not surprising that a miracle accompanies the birth of Jesus. What's more surprising is who Jesus is born to, because he's not born to someone who can give him everything. He's born to an unknown, poor, uneducated, unmarried girl. And the God of the universe wraps Jesus the way that he did to show us an example of humility to follow. To think less of ourselves and more of others. That from the very beginning of Jesus' life, he's teaching us humility. Look at what Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5 through 8. It says, "Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who although he existed in the form of God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped." In other words, he didn't regard being God something to be held on to. He wasn't going to hold on to his deity. He wasn't going to hold on to his rights as God. He wasn't going to hold on to heaven. That's not what he was going to grasp. But he emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant and being made in the likeness of men. Being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And in verse 5 it says, that's who we're supposed to follow. That's who we're supposed to be like. I had an elder in New Mexico by the name of Vernon Hollett. Vernon was a missionary to the Navajo for 50 years. He could fluently speak Navajo. He could fluently write Navajo. And that was funny because when he took Greek in college, his Greek teacher told him that he would never learn another language. And he went on a missions trip to the Navajo reservation, and he fell in love with those people, and he spent the rest of his life learning that language. And 20 years into being a missionary, the Navajo would often joke that this white man spoke Navajo better than they did. And he hosted a radio program in Navajo, and he planted more Navajo churches than I can even count. But he died this last fall, and when he died, hundreds of people showed up to his funeral to say goodbye to the white man who spoke Navajo. If you were to go to Vernon's home, though, you would not have known he was that important. His home consisted of 3 trailers that he welded together, and it was filled with used furniture. He had a small pull-along camper trailer in the back with a space heater in it that he did his radio programs out of. And most of his money went to the Navajo. When you spend 6 years with a man like that, all you learn is humility. And it was his humility that brought so many people to his funeral. And it was his humility that brought so many more to God. All because he followed the Jesus who left heaven to become poor for us. I don't think we always grasp that part of Christianity. I don't. Like, I'm not looking at anyone else. I'm looking at me. I have everything I need and a whole bunch of stuff I don't. But that idea of becoming poor for the sake of the gospel, you just don't see that all the time. But it's that example of humility that God wanted us to learn so that we could bring people to him. Of not thinking about what could I get from this or what could I enjoy from this, but what brings people to the Christ who left heaven for me. But I also think God wrapped his gift of Jesus the way he did as an expression of his sacrificial love for us. I don't think we think about love, when we think about love, that we always think about sacrifice. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's things we do for people, but a lot of times it's because of the things we get from people. In relationships, it seems like a lot of the stuff that happens is contractual, Okay, well, I know I'm doing these things for them. I know I'm doing these things. What are they doing for me? Well, okay, I feel like my services are worth this much. Are they living up to what I feel I'm giving them? Kind of funny. That's how Christmas has been this year at our house between Tamara and I. She wants a new dog, and she started to schmooze me on it, and I don't want a new dog. I don't want one. And so I said, well, what do I get if we get a new dog? And she said, well, you could get a PlayStation 4 or a new gun. And so now we have Arlo. I can't see him, but he's a black dog. He's okay, I guess. We were told he was potty trained. That was a lie. That was a lie. But I think if I've got to choose between the video game and gun, I think I'll get the gun because I figured that could solve my dog problem. I'm kidding. Partially. No. But you see it all the time. People trade off on their favors in their marriage, their friends, their family, because it's, am I getting what I feel I'm giving? But there isn't anything you can point to in the birth of Jesus that God got out of it. All we can point to what he gave up. He gave up heaven for poverty, his glory for anonymity, and his majesty for shame. He gave up life for death so we could live. And all we can say about the birth of Jesus is that God did it for us so that one day we could have the chance to be together with him. All we get from the birth of Jesus is that God loves us so much more than we loved him. I think it's easy to overlook the value of something based on the way it's wrapped. Sometimes we tear through the wrapping paper to get to the good stuff. Or we can look at the wrapping paper and dismiss what's inside based on what's outside. But when God wraps a gift, he wraps it as meaningfully as what he puts inside of it. But a lot of us, I think, are missing out on the gift of Jesus because of the wrapping paper. We know the Christmas story. Like, how many of you came this morning expecting that I was going to preach Christmas? Like, yeah, that's what we do. It's December. It's time. We go through the motions. We're going to hear about baby Jesus and wise men and shepherds. We know the story. And so we can show up because, it's Christmas. We got to go through the motions of it. And we can just miss that because we're going through the story. We can really miss what's in it because we're used to the wrapping paper. And in the end, I think we end up missing what we really need. We need the Christmas story. We need to hear that Jesus came exactly the way that he did. Because this story teaches us exactly what Jesus was about and what we need to be about. It teaches us about a God who knows what you're going through, a God who calls us into a life of humility, and a God who has called you to sacrifice yourself for others the same way he sacrificed himself for you. We're going to be taking communion. And, communion is the story of Jesus from Christmas to the cross. A lot of times when we take the bread, we think about, you hear people talk about, this was the bread, it's broken for you like his body was broken for you. But actually when you read the prophecies about Jesus' body wasn't broken at all. Actually, the prophecy spoke against that. It said that not a bone in his body would be broken. But what the bread really speaks about is his incarnation. It speaks about how this God became flesh, how he came to live for you. And the juice speaks about his blood, how he came to die for you. And in communion, we have the entire narrative of Jesus, from birth to death to life again. And I don't know, we invite you to come to these tables, but I don't know what you come to these tables with. Some of you might be sitting here today looking at all the people around you. How many of you you don't have to show your hands, but if you want to, you can. How many of you have ever felt like that everyone else around you has it together except you? Like you come and you're like, well, their lives seem fine. I think everyone feels that at some point. And we can come here and we can feel totally alone. But the great unifying thing about Jesus is he knows what it's like to be all of us. He knows what it's like to go through what you've gone through. And maybe today for you, what you need to do is start a relationship with the one person I know who can completely understand you. And for some of you, you haven't begun that journey yet. You haven't started that journey. You haven't put your faith in Jesus. You haven't made him your Lord. And you haven't given up on your old life to start a new life. And if that's you, then we need to talk. You need to know the Jesus who knows you better than you know yourself. And if that's something you want to talk about when you come up for communion, you could either put in a connection card that says that, or you could come talk to me, or after church we could set something up and we could talk together. For others of you, though, this is a time to humble yourself. Man, it is amazing how Christmas has stopped being about Jesus, you know? It's become about so many other things. It's become about family, and family's a good thing, but the commercialism, the rat race, I mean, it gets to a place where sometimes we don't even get to enjoy this season. This is a season of celebration, and all we do is panic and worry about what are we going to get and how are we going to get it. And here's Jesus that comes in the middle of all of this and just says, just stop. And sometimes what we need to do is just stop and humble ourselves and remember why we're here. Remember why we're going into this season. And it's not about how we can move our families forward and get everything we want. It's about us celebrating the day that life came into the world. Real life came into the world. And for some of you, this might be a time for you to humble yourself with your offering. To make it about who we love, to make it about Jesus. But for others of you, it may be someone you know who needs something, and you have the ability to help, but you have to make a choice. Am I going to help myself, or am I going to help them? That's the tough thing at Christmas, There's so much stuff that we feel like we got to provide for the ones we love. And we can see so much opportunity around us, and we can have our heartstrings tugged on, and we can go, wow, man, I really wish someone would help them. And maybe this is a time for you to consider those people and take a little bit less for yourself so someone else can have a little bit more. I don't know what God's putting on your heart, but that's what Christmas is about. And so we're going to have communion because Christmas leads to the cross. And so I'm going to pray, and after I pray, we want to invite you to the tables. Eat the bread, drink the cup, turn in your tithes and offerings. If you got something you need to put on a connection card, you're new, visitor, put that in. Prayer requests, put that in too. But then join us as we sing to Jesus. Father in heaven, we thank you for today. We thank you for what you're doing. We thank you for what you have done. God, there are so many times we can look at this story and we could just look at the surface of it and not appreciate what it really is inside. And God, I just pray that you would move in our hearts and move in our lives and move in our minds in a way that we would appreciate exactly what it is you've given us. God, I pray that you would just make all of us slow down this month. To make all of us pause. To put aside our shopping, to put aside our plans, to put aside all the busyness that we can get wrapped up in this season. And come back to the baby that was born in a shed. God, you are wonderful in all that you do. And God, we thank you for the thought and the planning you put into giving us Jesus. God, as we go into communion, I pray that our hearts would be on you, our focus would be on you, and that all the glory would go to you. And we ask all of this in Jesus' name.